Welcome. I'm Rachel Gilkey, Director of Programming and Education at Irish Arts Centre. Today is the second day of our 12th annual Poetry Fest. It has been a pleasure to work with curator Nick Laird to together bring you a digital version of this, my favorite weekend in the Irish Arts Centre calendar, and one that firmly holds hands with the intent and magic of the original festival by not trying to be that festival, but to be one that exists in its own right, using the opportunity that programming for online provides to gather people from all over the world without the barrier of travel, including poets joining from Kentucky, Wales, Northern Ireland, Ireland, London, and New York, by sharing their work, their words, their gorgeous readings, so that you can go back and visit with them on Irish Arts Centre's website after watching today. And as in Terrance Hayes' reading at 3:15, to combine poetry and visual art in an experience that is just as much film as it is reading. PoetryFest is always the first weekend in November, which means it followed the devastation caused by Hurricane Sandy, and it immediately followed the past two presidential elections. But in its 12 years, despite also being in November, I've always been able to look outside and see blue skies and the sun shining, and that is just as true today as in any other year. I'm speaking to you live this afternoon, but these readings and conversation were recorded by the poets over the course of the last week. There's still much to do collectively to take care of each other, to really take care of each other. And I hope you will find the words that follow as inspiring and full of fuel as I have. Thank you so much to all the poets, Ailbhe Darcy, Ada Limón, Miriam Gamble, whose readings will happen in a moment, and Terrance Hayes and Paula Meehan, who joined Nick Laird to discuss the 5 poems that each would take to a desert island. That's at 2 p.m., followed by their own readings at 3:15. You can also visit irishartcenter.org to watch and hear last night's Favorite Irish Poems Festival launch event, with 18 special guests sharing a best-loved Irish poem. Thank you to Culture Ireland and all of Irish Arts Centre's supporters, whose support makes this possible. Thank you to Poetry Ireland, the Seamus Heaney Centre, New York Irish Centre, Irish American Writers and Artists, Glucksman Ireland House, and the Irish American Society of Nassau, Suffolk, and Queens for helping share these events with your community. And thank you to poet, professor, critic, and festival curator Nick Laird, and to my colleagues at Irish Arts Centre, including Carrie Tusi and Vivian Fong, and especially Max Smith. I hope you enjoy the rest of this afternoon. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nick Laird. I'm the curator of the Poetry Fest, and I wanted to introduce our 3 poets reading today. I'm sure, like me, you haven't had a lot of sleep with the election, but let's try and concentrate on poetry for 40 minutes or so. So we've got 3 wonderful poets with us today. Ailbhe Darcy, Miriam Gamble, and Ada Limón. So I'm going to introduce them in the order they're going to read, which is Ailbhe, Ada, and Miriam. Ailbhe was born and raised in Dublin. She studied for her PhD and MFA at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, and taught there and at the University of Munster in Germany. She's a lecturer now in creative writing at Cardiff University. She has published her poetry widely, and her first collection, Imaginary Menagerie, was published by Blood Axe in 2011. Her second collection, Insistence, was published in 2018 and shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Award and won the Pigott Prize for Irish Poetry. And what a book it is. Both celebration of the natural world and elegy for it. Insistence is the work of a human trying to figure out for themselves the world they've encountered, and the work of a parent trying to figure out the world they brought their child into. It sort of introduces the child to the district, as it were, to the locale, to the jellyfish and stink bugs and joy and greed and fear of existence. She writes, "Somewhere perhaps you meet that apricot tree with its forking branches, its veiled expression, its thinly veiled cankers, before walking on regardless." Darcy writes poems in the kind of voice you implicitly trust. She can tell us, "To be honest, I usually care quite a lot about the reader, but today I just want to get the whole thing down on paper," and we feel it to be true. Insistence has a long poem alphabet which takes as its model and booster rocket Inger Christensen's seminal alphabet poem, published back in the 60s, translated into English not that long ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And Darcy's homage is a sort of daring act not many would risk, but she more than pulls it off. It's a fitting tribute to and also renewal of Christensen's work, and Darcy achieves significant resonances in the tones she strikes. This is questing original work. Poetry is a necessary instrument of inquiry here, but the final recourse, the first cause, is the natural world, where her gaze tends to find itself moving finally to. As she puts it in alphabet, seeming to renounce poetry while, of course, getting it all down in poetry. I look for you here, okay? Makes more sense, I think, than looking at the sky, than harking in church, tucking heels, marking time. Okay. Makes more sense than flicking through books, plucking echoes, tracking words. Makes more sense. Okay. So this is where I look. I poke beneath bracken. Bracken makes a blanket for huckleberries. I'm really delighted Ailbhe could read for us even virtually today.
Hello, New York. The car was black and unwashed and had fenders. The windows inclined upwards. The atmosphere cool and pure in all weathers. On sidewalks, a door would fetch open to bid me ride shotgun, feet on the dashboard. A coming and going car, one end as blunt as the other. It soared through a town where men once built Studebakers. Movie stars stepped out in black and white. Anna Oliver scolded Henry Ford. "This is a family home, Mr. Ford." It wasn't a Chevy, but it was noir. One night when you were driving me, a cloud of insects were ours for outriders. They died of us, and we sang out. We drove the baby home in that black car. So I lived in the States for 6 years in a little town that you may have heard of called South Bend in Indiana. And my son was born there. And a little after my son was born, as one does, I escaped for a little while to do some writing in the home of a friend in Chicago. And this friend happened to be an urban mushroom farmer. So while I was staying in her house, of course, I read all the books on her bookshelves, and I discovered that there are a lot of different kinds of mushrooms, more than you might expect, and that they have some really wild and wacky names. So what that means for you is that this poem is quite relaxing for you to listen to, because if there is anything in it that you don't get, that you don't understand, you can assume fairly safely that that is the name of a mushroom. So this is mushrooms. Mushrooms could grow on a person all the same. The body is a vertical farm. Your father and I have begun a new generation. Admitted we didn't have the wits, the brawn. We've handed on the weather, the body vulnerable and brief, the fact of mushroom farmers. And there are mushrooms, at least, with names like snakes, handled by some Georgia preacher slick in the arts of faith. There are snake handlers who live dry bitten by diamondbacks, dealing out chance. There are scarlet cardinals, flaming out reliably each spring, shriek, shriek, tut, 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 tut. So that even this winter, one might squint at a doily of fern frost, the polar pig's spore print, and make out something more than a sentence. Might ferret out a night-grown mushroom to whirligig in a pocket, fungible chip. Might produce satyr's beard, pheasant's back, devil's urn, as a hipster in downtown South Bend produces beer. Beards, faith in the future of beards, might trust a body to the Bluets. Come to mention apocalypse, and we can't seem to help it. The way we've lived this half-dozen years has become our life, as though it had an end. We tell the night we arrived like myth. Thicket of insects whir, throat-thickening heat of the air. Impenetrable words the landlord spoke as he led us up through unlit stairs. Nights we lay awake in fear, expecting visitors with firearms and unexpected turns of phrase. They'd slaughter us for hesitation. They elected their first black president that year. We sat snug on the deck with beers and listened in by lightning bug. How quickly the strange becomes familiar. How somehow we got from there to here. Bunkered down with you, American child, in the shrive lights of this cuckoo winter. How in our time the weather has changed, and the meaning of weather. Machines pull machines from a bank of snow. News is dread heavy with vortex. They say the way to fix this mess is to cultivate one's mushrooms and take up very little space. Instead, we want to ask if there might be some way back to what we wanted when we first came, to flitter about, cardinals like bunting, lightning bugs, just lighting out. I had a bit of a hard time after my son was born. I was obviously far away from family, and I suffered very badly from, among other things, insomnia. So even when the baby slept, I did not sleep. So it was a while before I left the house at all. And when I did, it was to go and see an exhibition of photographs by the photographer Ansel Adams at the South Bend Museum. And I'm sure that most of you have encountered Ansel Adams photographs before. There are these, of course, black and white photographs of landscapes that make America look like a wilderness. And so they very, very rarely have people in them, but they very often have a particular tree called the aspen. And the aspen, particularly in Adams' photographs, is a very shivery looking tree, sort of delicate and ghost-like. But in fact, aspens are extremely hardy. And the reason they're so hardy is because, as it turns out, they're not individual trees at all. They're actually a collective. They're secretly colonies which are connected under the ground, where we can't see them. So this is Ansel Adams' aspens. To tiny Ansel Adams, newly arrived on this earth, the sky must seem a miracle. I'd commit the scene to black and white if I could. The sky bright and bottomless, trees gnarled as the knees of elephants. Helpless in his built-right pram, Ansel Adams is watching the clouds roll in. Then the clouds would gather speed, roll out again, and the camera panned down to Ansel Adams, the man, kneeling on granite choosing one filter over another. It's as though more and greater apparatus were needed to recapture that first exposure, says the voiceover. As though Ansel Adams were a pioneer, toiling after the spirit, not just the body of America. To tiny Ansel Adams, newly arrived on this earth, the sky must seem a matter of fact. It's the mind beneath he wants to grasp, stowed in its smart black enclosure. I'd have his pram gather speed and transform. A cartoon robot against the heavens, wheels spinning into Ansel Adams' camera. Now the bright black sky is Ansel Adams, and Ansel Adams the filter. Light renders each tree a bouquet of paper. The Great Depression gathers, like so much weather. To tiny Ansel Adams, newly arrived on this earth, the sky is what it is, taught in its isness. Sometime before dawn, the section framed by an here blackens and brightens, and each tree out there glows with itself, with the certainty of all Ansel Adams' aspens. No one is watching, but this one bewildered immigrant, toiling after sleep, saturated in monochrome. Sometimes it's all you'll find in the wilderness. Ansel Adams, tiny in his pram, composing the day just gone. Thank you for listening.
So our next reader is Ada Limón. We're honoured to have Ada with us today. She grew up in California and studied theatre at the University of Washington, then did her MFA at NYU, where she worked with Phil Levine and Sharon Olds, a friend of the IAC's PoetryFest. Limón's published 5 collections of poetry, Lucky Wreck and This Big Fake World, which she published in the same year. They both won poetry prizes and they were published 9 months apart. Sharks in the River, Bright Dead Things and The Carrion. She's received many awards for her work, including the Guggenheim and the National Book Critics Circle Award. I'd mentioned that Limón has said she identifies with Mexican culture through her father's side, as well as being American, obviously. But she's also a bit Irish in heritage, so welcome home. Limón's work seems absolutely authentic, by which I mean it seems like a real person experiencing real things. She's not afraid of taking emotional risks in the poem either, and her endings, and actually it occurs to me now that Sharon Olds, her teacher, is a bit like this too. Her endings are remarkable and often leave the reader a little rearranged, a little breathless. Try this poem, The Raincoat, which I've returned to time and again since my own mother died. Limón writes of her mother taking her to massage therapy, deep tissue work, osteopathy for her crooked spine, and getting her to sing the whole journey. Limón remembers that I never asked her what she gave up to drive me or how her day was before this chore. Before the poem goes on to finish. Today, at her age, I was driving myself home from yet another spine appointment, singing along to some maudlin but solid song in the radio, and I saw her mom take her raincoat off and give it to her young daughter when a storm took over the afternoon. My God, I thought. My whole life I've been under her raincoat, thinking it was somehow a marvel that I never got wet. Limón herself has said that most of my poems are autobiographical. The strange twisty narrative of the inner voice, the voice underneath the voice, is always what fascinates me and keeps me writing. Her poems are consummately crafted pieces, and I'd add that they're excellent to teach. The poems allow the reader to witness someone encountering the real world and inquiring into that encounter with grace and generosity and insight. What more could anyone ask? Limón also published recently in the New Yorker one of the great poems to come out of the pandemic, The End of Poetry, which I'm really hoping she'll read for us today. So I'm honoured that we could finally get Ada to read for us here at PoetryFest, even virtually.
Hi, my name is Ada Limón, and I am so pleased to be here. I wish I was there in person, but I'm so glad the festival is continuing in this virtual way. I just want to express my gratitude to everyone who is putting it together and making sure that poetry continues despite the pandemic. I'm going to read a poem that's a spring poem, and I know we're heading into winter, but what gets me through winter is thinking about spring, and I think maybe I need that right now. Instructions on not giving up. More than the fuchsia funnels breaking out of the crab apple tree. More than the neighbor's almost obscene display of cherry limbs shoving their cotton candy colored blossoms to the slate sky of spring rains. It's the greening of the trees that really gets to me. When all the shock of white and taffy and the world's baubles and trinkets leave the pavement strewn with the confetti of aftermath, the leaves come, patient, plodding, a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us, a return to the strange idea of continuous living, despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty. Fine then, I'll take it, the tree seems to say, a new slick leaf unfurling like a fist. I'll take it all. I'm not a winter person, so I need my coping mechanisms as we go into it. Because it is November, I want to read a November poem. I wonder if there's anything else I want to add to it. No, I'll just let this be. Carrying. The sky's white with November's teeth, and the air is ash and wood smoke. A flush of color from the dying tree, a cargo train speeding through. And there, that's me, standing in the wintering grass, watching the dogs suffer the cold leaves. I'm not large from this distance, just a fence post, a hedge of holly. Wider still beyond the rumble of overpass, mayors look for what's left of green in the pasture. A few winglings kick out, and theirs is the same sky, white, like a calm flag of surrender pulled taut. A few farms over, there's our mare, her belly barrel round with foal, or idea of foal. It's Kentucky, late fall, and any mare worth her salt is carrying the next potential stakes winner. Ours, her coat thicker with the season's muck, leans against the black fence, and this image is heavy within me. How my own body, empty, clean of secrets, knows how to carry her, knows we were all meant for something. I'll read another horse poem. I live in Kentucky, and so there are a lot of horses here. And this is, I began this with an image of a horse being born and how almost beautiful but also absurd it is that a horse comes out of another horse. And so, and then I ended it. It became slowly a love poem. So, what I didn't know before was how horses simply give birth to other horses. Not a baby by any means, not a creature of liminal spaces, but already a four-legged beast hell-bent on walking, scrambling after the mother. A horse gives way to another horse, and then suddenly there are two horses, just like that. That's how I loved you. You off the long train from Red Bank, carrying a coffee as big as your arm, a bag with two computers swinging in it unwieldily at your side. I remember we broke into laughter when we saw each other. What was between us wasn't a fragile thing to be coddled, cooed over. It came out fully formed, ready to run. And then I think I'll read a poem that deals with the idea of our own myths. And I think the myths in our lives are really important in so many ways. And it's how we build our own stories. And so this is a myth that my father used to tell me based on a story. If you can hear my dog, I'm sorry. I tried to calm her down, but she's ready for her WALK. Cannibal Woman. I'm looking for the right words, but all I can think of is parachute or ice water. There's nothing but this sailboat inside of me, slowly trying to catch a wind. Maybe there's an old man on it, maybe a small child. All I know is they'd like to go somewhere. They'd like to see the sail straighten, go tense, and take them someplace. But instead, they wait. A little tender wave comes up and leaves them right where they were all along. How did this happen? No wind I can conjure anymore. My father told me the story of a woman larger than a mountain who crushed redwoods with her feet, who could swim a whole lake in 2 strokes. She ate human flesh and terrorized the people. I loved that story. She was bigger than any monster or Bigfoot or Loch Ness creature, a woman who was like weather, as enormous as a storm. He'd tell me how she walked through the woods, each tree coming down, branch to sawdust, leaf to skeleton, each mountain pulverized to dust. Then they set a trap, a hole so deep she could not climb out of it. I have known that trap. Then people set her on fire with torches, so she could not eat them anymore, could not steal their children or ruin their trees. I liked this part too, the fire. I imagined how it burned her mouth, her skin, how she tried to stand but couldn't, how it almost felt good to her, as if something was finally meeting her desire with desire. The part I didn't like was the end. How each ash that flew up in the night became a mosquito. And she is still all around us in the dark, multiplied. I have worried my whole life that my father told me this because she is my anger. First comes this hunger, then abyss, then fire. And then a nearly invisible fly made of ash goes on and on, eating mouthful after mouthful of those I love. And I'm going to close with a new poem that came out in the New Yorker magazine in May. It was written during the pandemic and at a time when I was really feeling like I couldn't write. And of course, the way I dealt with not writing was to write a poem. Thank you again for having me. The end of poetry. Enough of osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple and seeds, samara and shoot. Enough chiaroscuro, enough of thus and prophecy, and the stoic farmer and faith in our Father and 'tis of thee. Enough of bosom and bud, skin and God not forgetting, and star bodies and frozen birds. Enough of the will to go on and not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing. Enough of the kneeling and the rising and the looking inward and the looking up. Enough of the gun, the drama, and the acquaintance's suicide, the long-lost letter on the dresser. Enough of the longing and the ego and the obliteration of ego. enough of the mother and the child and the father and the child, and enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate, enough of the brutal and the border, enough of can you see me, can you hear me, enough I am human, enough I am alone and I am desperate, enough of animal saving me, enough of the high water, enough sorrow, enough of the air and its ease. I am asking you to touch me. Thank you so much.
Our last poet reading today is Miriam Gamble. Miriam was born in Brussels in 1980 and grew up in Belfast. She studied at Oxford and at Queen's University in Belfast, where she completed a PhD in contemporary British and Irish poetry. In 2007, she won an Eric Gregory Award, and in 2010, the Ireland Chair of Poetry Bursary. She has published 3 collections, beginning with The Squirrels Are Dead in 2010, Pyrrhic Music in 2014, and What Planet last year. She lectures in creative writing at Edinburgh University. Gamble writes the kind of poems that can go anywhere. The reader wanders through and wonders at landscapes of the world and of Gamble's mind. She can be surreal and opaque and suddenly direct. The clocks went forward, the clocks went back. Someone lost their temper at me. She's funny too, giving her partner a description of being chivalric with a Dyson, for example, and frequently using mock epic to mock both herself and pomp where she finds it. And she's very good on childhood, such as in the wonderful poem Gutties, the Northern Irish word for trainers, which comes from gutta percha, I think an old word for latex, what the soles would have been made of. And growing up in Ulster, like anywhere, I guess, though I'm 5 years older than Miriam, who's just a spring chicken, it was vitally important what gutties or trainers you wore to school. I remember being teased remorselessly about my Gola trainers. My parents wouldn't or couldn't afford to get me Nikes. Here's the poem. On this shoe you have centered all your hopes of becoming a finished person. You tie it onto you and wait for the magic to occur. You've perceived how, in the playground lines, it heat seals the tips of other children. The exclamatory stroke that signals an artwork, how it holds them like a cup holds juice. And now you tie it onto you. You admire the clean white leather with the emerald flashes. Imitation Adidas out of Duns. But its credentials are neither here nor there. It is the only hope for you. I'd better stop there, or I could read the whole poem. But Gamble can give us the world back again, and not many poets do. It's a world given back to us made realer and also older and stranger and more wonderful. She can be, as I said, surreal, and Kafka's Odradek gets a wonderful poem in here. And she's a formidable craftsman. Take this stanza from Erne. I have never let into my poems life's rich jumble. I am tough, too true. I was anorexic who wants to hear it. Here is world-made metaphor. Words like a hummingbird's bill siphoning the inner nectar. Gamble's techniques are multiple here, subverting cliches. Life's rich tapestry becomes a life's rich jumble. And many of her words do double duty, their meanings qualified by the wrong footing and slipping lineation. Her tonal shifts are exciting too, with who wants to hear it being a genuine question to the reader perhaps, and also meaning, God, do shut up. And finally the stanza falls to that delicious image of a hovering hummingbird doing all this frantic wing work to keep still, balanced, and locate that inner nectar, the sustaining and magical elixir of language risen in one's own consciousness. These poems are really something. So I'm thrilled to have her reading today.
Hi, I'm Miriam. Thanks so much to Nick and to everybody at the IAC for inviting me to take part in PoetryFest 2020. I'm really pleased to be involved and to be reading with Ailbhe and Ada. 2016, the year in which this poem was written, was a year of waking up in the middle of the night and discovering that the inconceivable and unbearable had become reality. I'm recording this on what is for me the evening of the 3rd of November, and hoping beyond hope for a good result tonight. I'm not going to say much more about the poem except to mention a drink that arises in it, Cartachal, which is a type of sherry, a brand of sherry that sponsors the Feria in Malaga. The Feria itself is a kind of communal huli in which everybody between the ages of about 14 and 94 is wasted, which is a quite unusual occurrence in a Spanish city and somewhat disturbing to witness and be surrounded by. Feria de Malaga. Fuck knows what it's all about, but if you really want to drink Cartachal, a beaded bag ought to be purchased for our wits, given how everybody hears like their inner head fell off. Even at the best of times, and it's hardly the best of times, someone is as apt as not, you know it, to unlever the stone under which we're hunkered for the purposes of building a low wall or hiding stuff. They won't mean to kill us. They'll only want to sleep when it's too cold to sleep without a wind-protecting wall, or to bury things they covet and have nicked from a neighbour, such as, say, perhaps a wife, a jammy roll, a frame like a resplendent crust. But in the way, we're in the way, and love, that's life in a universe of cold calculation. So you keep your wits about you, and you don't drink Cartachal or potions of its ilk, saving you must. As, for example, now. A lot of the poems in this book are sort of preoccupied with disorientation, I think, whether viewed through the lens of memory or perception, or both. Consequently, quite a large number of them are quite surreal and quite dark also. I'm going to read one more that falls into that category, and then I'm going to read a couple about animals having the crack, because I think we've kind of all got enough grimness in our lives at the moment. I was invited a few years ago to contribute a poem to an anthology of responses to the Alice books of Lewis Carroll. The poem I wrote doesn't really respond to any particular episode or occurrence in either of the books. Rather, it's keying into the general atmosphere of both, and in particular to the way in which, as I perceived it, they figure the relationship between truth and power, which is, put bluntly, that truth is whatever the most powerful person says it is at any given time. This is not in my own voice. Wonderland. It came to me of a sudden that my neighbour was a threat to peace, security, the nation. Previously, I had had no sense of this, but I knew it to be true, so I set about letting the people know who should know, and I must say it was a source of pride when, on the basis of my information, he was carried away for questioning, his face blank as a moon. I dream sometimes that my neighbour is a nut in a cluster of nuts hanging on a tree. They're out of reach and beautiful, glinting in the sun, and my dream self wants to grab one. I don't know what it means, but did I say that the Queen called afterwards to offer her congratulations? I said to her, "Your Majesty," and here I grew feet taller than my normal stature. What you see is what you get, and I am a personage who knows what he sees. She liked that, though, the strangest thing. She complained of snow when one felt quite clearly it was balmy and the depths of summer. Flowers blossoming to the waist, bees whipping the pollen into sugared combs. One of the things that normally happens and that didn't happen in my life this year is my partner and I would usually go to Spain for a week or 10 days in the summer. He speaks quite good Spanish and I I'm learning slowly and incompetently. And something we've done a couple of times when we've been there is to go up into the mountains in Andalusia, Las Alpujarras, on horseback with a guide and camp out overnight. The first time we did this, we stayed for one night. I was moonstruck by the beauty of the whole experience and wrote a very lyrical sequence sometime after our return. The second time, we went for 2 nights. The weather was not with us. It was freezing. We struggled to find anywhere sheltered to sleep, and on the second night, a fox pilfered all of the energy-bearing food we'd brought with us by chewing through the saddlebags. And so I ended up with this second time around. It starts out in a human voice and then morphs very quickly after about 4 lines into the voice of a slightly ridiculously over-eloquent fox whose mouth is as stuffed with ornate language as with tasty comestibles. It's called Siete Lagunas, which just means 7 lakes, and is the name of the area that we were camping in. In the night, you huddle to stay alive. In the night, the fine-spun faces of the foxes exit holes in the fabric of the mountain and apprise themselves what's what. What has the sky caught in its net? Has it dogs with it? Has it dogs with it? Is there tin cast round it and the bag that secures it? Is it edible? Can it be burrowed through? Is it vegetal? Is it fatty? Fatty's best, crystalled or cured. Off in a caravan of foxes, if it honks flesh, if it smacks sugar. Should it have the juicy fizz of the garden? Don't bother. Said, don't bother. When light comes up on the thinly knotted hoop, the embroidery and party-coloured wares of the one-night scavengers be gone. Ascend rock faces, sprinkle greenery, hot blood focused on the freight. Have it in the mouth, in the belly, in the backbone of the tapestry, snore still or rolling in play. Observe how the oily saucisson fletches your brush, your intellect with matter silken. How your claws flash silver, silver grey, lengthening before your very eyes like dream escarpments. In the gloom, in the spatter of squinnied rays. I'm going to finish up with a poem about a horse. There are lots of poems about horses in my most recent book, and a good number in my previous book as well. Not really about horses, about a horse. Mine, or rather I was hers, I suppose, as she would have seen it. I had her for 17 years, and in the last 10 years I think I wrote a lot about or through her, and I lost her last month, so I will try not to weep while I'm reading this. The incident that it's centred on, the poem itself was written a few years ago, and the thing happened years before that, very early on, after I got her, when she was young. She jumped an absolutely blood-curdlingly massive hedge from the farm that she was stabled on into the next one. Fortunately, I was not there at the time, and so it fell, rather than to me, to the guy who owned the yard to spend his afternoon attempting to recapture her. Mare at large. The mare has lifted into the sky, has cleared the hedge and breached the next farm along. All afternoon she will gallop freely with her tail over her back. She isn't minded to be caught. She has jumped and she will gallop, the mare who, finding your finger in her jaws, will press the bone and look at you and stop. A mare is not a river, is not a child jumping hedges from the window of a train. Gather and reach, jump the houses, the factories and everything. What is visible is jumpable so long as the striding's right. A mare is not a river. She will tire, will take into her foam-flecked mouth a carrot like a finger. She will be caught. But still, the mare has jumped the hedge and breached the next farm along. She has galloped all afternoon, flags flaunting in the wind. This cannot be taken away from her. Thanks so much again to the festival for having me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the programme.
Hey, I'm Andy. Normally I would greet you in the intimacy of the Irish Arts Centre's gallery after the reading and offer you a tea or a coffee or other refreshment. Now we're going to take a short break before the next event, so if you want to fix yourself a little something, go ahead. The great thing about the festival being digital is, although I can't get to say hello in person, people can tune in the world over. See you in a bit.
Thanks, Andy. We do have about a 10-minute break before the next event, which is Desert Island Poems, where we get to hear from masters Paula Meehan and Terrance about the 5 poems they would each take to an island. And there's a lovely little surprise I think you'll probably enjoy about one of those decisions. Please check out the comments section in the meantime for links posted from Irish Arts Centre on how you can purchase books, which is a great way to continue to support artists during these times, and also a link to request a signed book plate for books you purchase or if you already own them. In the meantime, stretch, grab some tea or a snack, enjoy some of the poems of the day that will be shared in the stream here, and the stream will keep rolling. We'll see you back at 2 p.m. Thanks.
Hello. So welcome to our Desert Island Poems section of the PoetryFest. We have with us tonight Paula Meehan from Ireland, hi Paula, and Terrance Hayes from America. I've given them both fulsome and detailed introductions later on before their readings, so I won't go over it now, except to say that we're delighted they could both join us. So what the format is, each of you have picked 3 or 4 poems that you would like to take with you to a desert island, and now you read them and we discuss them. It's quite straightforward. We're going to begin with Paula, who's chosen Amber by Evan Boland.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here. Hi, Nick.
Hi.
And it's great to be here with you, Terrance, as well, virtually in my living room. And I chose Amber because we're still reeling, really, with the loss of Yvonne, who died so suddenly last April. It was a huge shock, and it sent shockwaves right throughout the English poetry-loving world. Those who love poetry in English and in translation and all over, and especially in former colonies, because she was the great poet who probed into the colonized mind and what it meant to be a woman and a poet in an ex-colony. So Amber too is, the grief of the great northern forests. And I imagined if I was sent to a desert island that I would miss the great pine forests that I love so much of the northern territories. Amber, it never mattered that there was once a vast grieving, trees on their hillsides, in their groves weeping, a plastic gold dripping through seasons and centuries to the ground, until now. On this fine September afternoon from which you are absent, I am holding, as if my hand could store it, an ornament of amber you once gave me. Reason says this: the dead cannot see the living will never see the dead again. The clear air we need to find each other in is gone forever. Yet this resin once collected seeds, leaves, and even small feathers as it fell and fell, which now in a sunny atmosphere seem as alive as they ever were, as though the past could be present and memory itself a Baltic honey, a chafing at the edges of the scene, a showing off of just how much can be kept safe inside a flawed translucence.
Thank you. It's a wonderful poem. Paula, can you talk about why it appeals to you so much?
Well, because I will always associate it now with Yvonne's death. She died, her birthday was in September. So I will always associate September now with her loss and her going. And the ideas in it that something is held. And in fact, Amber has been a major tool in the investigation of lineage, of creatures, of feathers, and whole histories of individual animals and creatures have been put together from what has been kept safe in Amber. And many of her subjects, many of her great obsessions and themes were about things that are vulnerable and difficult to pass on, to transmit. How the stories that really interested her were fleeting and often didn't get transmitted through the matrilineal line, especially how those stories went underground or entered the oral tradition, where they were kept like these creatures, these wings, these bones, these bits of nature encapsulated in amber. So there's both that power that things do be kept, that they are kept and preserved in memory, and also the sense of their evanescence and their fleetingness. And this is something she does so well as a poet, over and over again. And I think it enshrines in Amber her whole life's adventure in poetry, what she sought to memorialize, what she sought to keep, and in that honor and advocate for.
Very good. There's this lovely comparison between memory and Amber, but also, of course, between poetry and memory and Amber. It seems to me like the poetry itself is a chafing at the edges of the scene, a showing off of just how much can be kept safe. So it's sort of almost working on 3 levels. How do you feel about it, Terrance?
With all of these poems, I think about the occasions under which you would need them on a desert island. So, like you need a prayer, you need a love poem, you need a poem that you can keep rereading. I think this kind of falls in the category of prayer and like letter, like when you're lonely on that island and you just need to have someone to be in conversation with. It's that sort of poem, whatever you would call like a timeless lyric poem or something. So yeah, just like with all of them, I was like, what day would you read this if you were stranded on the island? So
it's kind of technically really interesting. It's got these weird long lines, these kind of chancy rhymes that pull you through. It's great. It's sort of not to bring it to a lowbrow place, but I was thinking of Amber. It's what they use in Jurassic Park to reconstruct the dinosaurs. They take the DNA out of the amber. But yeah, no, it's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Color.
Sorry,
Terrance. Fall color too. That amber has something to do with autumn. I think the September colors coming on.
Pliny thought amber was the teardrops wept by Neptune, the god of the sea, because they used to find it washing up on the Baltic shores.
I would have found it up in like the Shetland Islands or even on our own coasts, washed up.
Yeah. And then Pliny held a flame to it one day and it smelt the pine out of it, realized that when it started to burn, it smelled of pine and it was fossilized sap.
So I love that. And she is, as a poet, Yvonne Boland is very good at a meditation on an object right through her poetry. The black lace fan my mother gave me, a woman painted on a leaf, because she spent a lot of time hawking in the curio shops around Dublin for these treasures. And then she would make great poems out of the meditation on the object itself.
Hawking is such a great Irish word. We don't hear it enough.
Hawking.
I said hawking is such a great Irish word. We don't hear it enough.
Yeah.
All right, Nick, you got to put it in your next poem. Your evening writing you have to be able to use the word hawking.
I think I have it in poems. The greatest insult, when I was a kid, the greatest insult was to be called a bin hoker, which is someone who's hooking the bin. Anyway, let's do Carrying Comfort, Terrance, which is your first pick.
All right, yeah. I could cue it up in so many different ways, whether because it's the sonnet form, writing in isolation, writing when you're feeling the onset of despair, as I kind of feel this morning. So we'll talk about it. But so let me see if I can read it. It's also a weird poem to read because of that, the rhythm in his own head kind of thing. Let's see if we can do it. It's perfect for today, though, for this particular time of the hour. Carrying comfort. I'll not carry in comfort despair, not feast on thee, not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me, or most weary cry, I can cry no more. I can something, hope, wish they come, not choose not to be, but oh, thou terrible, why wouldst thou root on me thy ring whirled right foot rock, lay a lion limb against me, scan with darksome devouring eyes my bruised bones, and fan, oh, in terms of tempest, me heaped there, me frantic to avoid thee and flee. Why? That my chaff might fly, my grain lie sheer and clear, nay, in all that toil, that coil, since seems I kiss the rod, hand rather, my heart low, lapped length, stole joy, would laugh, cheer. Cheer whom, though? The heroes whose heaven handling flung me, foot trod me, or me that fought him? Oh, which one? Is it each one? That night, that year of now done darkness, I wretch lay wrestling with my God, my God.
Wonderful. So, Terrance, you mentioned it's appropriate for the moment. That's certainly right. I should just say that we're talking the day after the election, without a clear result.
Yeah, the morning of it. I mean, up until it, and again, I would, in any situation, if you asked me to put 5 or 10 poems on a list, this would be one of them. It's weird, it's mysterious, you never quite are sure where you are. It's not just despair, it's a little bit of uncertainty, grasping for hope, which is sort of, you know, that's like every day for me, pretty much. So in that regard, it works. But even again, the reason it's a poem you take on an island, because even today, when you're sort of in a limbo, we don't quite know what the outcome of the election will be. And I've just sort of been like, you know, I will hope until I'm forced to despair. That sort of would be, you know, some people think of me as an optimist. And I'm like, is that optimism? I mean, I just try to hope to the bitter end. And then when despair is with me, I'll accept it. So that's sort of where I am on the precipice of saying, well, just the way the numbers have turned out, that it's not a like clear repudiation of who Trump was. I feel the onset of despair, and I'm sort of saying, I'm not going to deal with you. I'm not going to feast on that despair yet until I have to. So, yeah. So it's just a good poem for many occasions. How about that?
Yeah.
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 But Paula, do you know this poem? Obviously.
Oh yeah, I mean, we were persecuted by the terrible sonnets when we were students. You know, they're so ferocious. My taste was bitter. My taste was me. That sense of self-loathing that is in these sonnets. He was so unhappy. You know, he's buried here in Dublin, up in Glasnevin.
Yeah, I didn't know that at first, because he was born in England and died. I don't know what that story is, but I know he's buried.
Yeah, he came here to teach in UCD, in the Catholic University, Newman's Catholic University, and he died of typhoid in what was for a while the women's toilets in the university building, the old building on St. Stephen's.
Fairly young too, right? Like in his 40s, maybe? Early 40s, late.
I can't remember his exact age, but he's up in the Jesuit plot up in Glasnevin Cemetery. What Michael Hartnett calls him Father Hopkins in his crowded grave. But he was deeply unhappy here. He hated it in Dublin, I'm sorry to say. I mean, I go through phases like that myself, but he felt totally cut off, and whatever the psychic energies that assailed him, he succumbed to typhoid. And, you know, I suppose that's also why these poems feel very relevant to the times we're in, because of that suffering, because of the assault on his own body at a time when he just felt, he felt the despair. I mean, I think they are the poems of a tortured being.
But though,
I think sorry that what? Sorry?
I think resisting it though, I think even wrestling, unbelievably trying to wrestle that despair, not giving into it, like hope something. So even like, it's not pure optimism or idealism, which I appreciate. It's a kind of realistic situation where terribly unhappy and yet saying, I'm not going to give into it, or how can I use this thing called writing or music or imagination to kind of resist whatever my circumstances are. That's kind of how I get it. So I think of it as, you know, resisting despair again. You know.
Yeah.
They're an incredible collection. The terrible sonnets, the awake and feel the fell of dark, not day, and there's nothing quite like them in the English language. You can see little things of the canon in here. You can see bits of John Donne maybe, and that kind of cluttered, really thickened language. But what about that parenthesis in the last line? One of the greatest parentheses in poetry.
Maybe.
You know who it reminds me of, right? Bishop.
Yeah.
One Heart.
Right.
I wonder if she got it from him.
Really terrific.
Especially where it comes in the last line towards the end, as it comes in her poem, her lovely Villanelle, which I nearly chose for this occasion. Yeah, it's such a fun.
If I had 10, it would have been on there.
Yeah.
We'll give you 10 next time. Okay, so in a wonderful, fortuitous Oh no, hold on, this is not your next one. Yeah, so Paula, would you like to do the Hermit's Hut?
Yeah, well, this was, I came across this as a child, and it was in a book given to me in primary school by my teacher, Miss Shannon, the Central Model Schools here in Dublin. And it was a Celtic miscellany. It had been published in 1951. And it was just, there were just so many curious, enchanting kind of things in it. Now, this is the version in that book, and there have been much better translations, more scholarly investigations of the medieval text. It's from the 10th century Irish. So there have been, and John Montague, the Tyrone poet, has a lovely version of it. But it's like that old poem of first looking into Chapman's Homer. You know, the first place you find the thing, it mightn't be the best version ever, but if the first place on the first hit just enraptures me forever. And I love this because the landscape that it describes, the medieval landscape of Ireland, the hermit's hut and the land around it, I would still see this on the island. There are still the traces of this beautifully sustainable landscape. They're vulnerable and they're diminishing by the year, but they're still there. You could still, and I have lived in places like this landscape. So, and this is from the Hermit's Hut. A little hidden lowly hut which owns the path-filled forest. Will you go with me to see it? A tree of apples of great bounty, huge, a seemly crop from small nutted branching green hazels in clusters like a fist. Excellent, fresh springs, a cup of water splendid to drink. They gush forth abundantly. Yew berries, bird cherries, tame swine lie down around it, goats, young pigs, wild swine, tall deer, does, a badger's brood. Foxes come to the wood before it. It is delightful. Fruits of rowan, black sloes of the dark black thorn, foods of wharts, spare berries, a clutch of eggs, honey, produce of heath peas. God has sent it, sweet apples, red bogberries, whortleberries, beer with herbs, a patch of strawberries, delicious abundance, haws, yew berries, kernels of nuts, a cup of mead from the goodly hazel bush, quickly served, brown acorns, mains of briar with fine blackberries. In summer with its pleasant, abundant mantle, with good tasting savor, there are pig nuts, wild marjoram, the cresses of the stream, green purity. The songs of the bright-breasted ringdoves, a beloved movement, the carol of the thrush, pleasant and familiar above my hut. Swarms of bees, beetles, soft music of the world, a gentle humming, wild geese, barnacle geese, shortly before All Hallows, music of the dark torrent, a nimble singer, the combative brown wren from the hazel bough, woodpeckers with their pied hoods in a vast host. Fair white birds come, cranes, seagulls, the sea sings to them, no mournful music, brown fowl out of the red heather. The heifer is noisy in summer, brightest of weather, not bitter or toilsome over the mellow plain, delightful, smooth, the voice of the wind against the branchy wood, grey with cloud, cascades of the river, the swan's song, lovely music, and a beautiful pine makes music to me. It is not hired. So considering that that poem is 1,000 years old, a whole millennium, and that we can still find those spaces, as I say, endangered, but still those spaces, rich, sustaining, are on the island through my childhood and really, you know, through my life. the version of Ireland that predominates is often a really fucked up one, you know. If it's not famine, it's the ongoing struggle for nationhood and all the lives lost. So the version I was always getting, especially as a child, was mournful Ireland. You know, we were encouraged basically to go out and die for it. And I just feel that there are other, like, okay, the land might have failed millions because of our colonized situation, but it also nourished us and nourished millions and is eminently capable of nourishment if we could give it the chance and stop destroying it. So to me, this is the landscape enclosed in amber for 1,000 years and still there to be both struggled for and well worth struggling for.
It's wonderful. I know that book, obviously, Kenneth Jackson's translations. I was a Tyrone poet as well and was given it in school, and it's wonderful. A lot of Irish literature has come from it. It's where Heaney found the Annals of Clonmacnoise poem and that story that he made into the poem. I love this piece, this kind of Edenic landscape, which then, and this little word at the end, it is not hired, seems to me the key to it. Like, it's about what was this prelapsarian thing, what was the fall? And the fall was the introduction of commerce, of feudalism, of hiring and telling people what to do. So it seems to me parading as something, but actually incredibly clever and beautiful and well done. So yeah, what do you think, T?
Well, you know, I was thinking about just the oral tradition, all the berries coming in, and I think just because I think I'll do the Etheridge Night again, like that oral tradition that links the two cultures. Primarily is repetition and song throughout the whole thing, and they both end kind of similarly too, with this kind of cry to music, like maybe music is the real answer to to every question.
Yes, that's very good. We'll get to the Etheridge Night poem. In fact, should we do it next? It might make an interesting comparison.
Yeah, let me do it next, because I was just thinking about the way those berries are echoing through this poem and the kind of list structure of it. And again, whatever that means, whatever the relationship between like the blues are. I was also even thinking in a more kind of just local sense of the blues having the same relationship for like African Americans as a piece like that would have for you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not the same depth of history, but it's performing the same kind of like quality being passed on, a quality of calling back to something pretty consistent across, you know, culture, right? So anyway, so I think even though it's a shorter kind of question, because it's a poem is like 1972, and it's a riff, it's a version of what the blues do, which is just sort of a cry. Again, here about today, because it's just where we are, it's either one or the other. Either you sort of like go and you say like, God, why have you done this to me? Why have you forsaken me? Which is sort of in the spirit of the Hopkins, or you just say like, you know, fuck it all, man. I'm just gonna get back in bed. I'm gonna make love. I'm gonna get drunk and just wait for the world to rise or burn. So I think feeling fucked up is one other kind of response of a question of like not having quite control of what your future might be. Feeling fucked up, Etheridge Night. Lord, she's gone, done left me, done packed up and split, and I with no way to make her come back. And everywhere the world is bare, bright, bone white, crystal sand glistens, dope, death, dead, dying, and jiving, drove her away, made her take her laughter and her smiles and her softness and her midnight sighs. Fuck Coltrane and music and clouds drifting in the sky. Fuck the sea and trees and the sky and birds and alligators and all the animals that roam the earth. Fuck Marx and Mao, fuck Fidel and Nkrumah and democracy and communism. Fuck smack and pot and red ripe tomatoes. Fuck Joseph, fuck Mary, fuck God, Jesus, and all the disciples. Fuck Fanon, Nixon, and Malcolm. Fuck the revolution, fuck freedom, fuck the whole motherfucking thing. All I want now is my woman back so my soul can sing.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So yeah, you know, it's what are the options here? To say fuck it all or to pray for somebody to change it all, you know? And that's, again, I mean, this is daily questions, why you would have a question like this on the island too. Sometimes you just want to just be like, forget it all. I know I'm stuck on an island. There's nowhere to go. So, you need something for love. You need something for the soul. You need something for the body when you think about the ways that poems can help us.
So, Terrance, can you talk a little bit about Etheridge Knight? I know you've written that wonderful critical engagement with them. In relation to the blues and Etheridge, what is this poem doing, do you think, in that way? What is the relationship between it and the blues?
Sure. Some of it's like with the profane, the most obvious way. If you think of like the deep tradition of the blues is the reason they were in juke junks, because they were equivalent to like, NWA or 2 Live Crew. Like there was a kind of raunch to it, obviously. But under that is just a kind of subversiveness, right? So the thing about Etheridge Knight, he was born in Mississippi. So he is really rooted in the 30s to that blues tradition, the migration, his family had migrated up. He was in the military, and then he was in prison for about 8 years. And he wrote a book, Poems from Prison, in Prison. And his second book is where this poem comes from, Feeling Fucked Up. So what I know about it, just in terms of interesting details, is like, yes, he was a real blues poet. So comes into being in the Black arts movement. A lot of Sonia Sanchez and Mary Baraka, a lot of people championed him. Gwendolyn Brooks championed him. She's partly responsible for his publications, but he got out. And I say to you again, he was a blues man. So all of his addictions and his problems they weren't all metaphor. So essentially, this is a poem about like when he found out that Sonia Sanchez wanted a divorce. He wrote it as soon as he got that news, according to something he said once before he read it. So it is the blues tradition. I mean, it is evoked in just the way that the blues are, out of longing, out of loss, as I said, out of kind of like, out of just fuck it all kind of quality. So certainly that's in the blues. So I would argue of all of those poets, maybe even more than Langston Hughes, I could get in trouble. I mean, different generation, he's like truly a quintessential blues poet, not just in style, but in sentiment. I mean, he wrote explicitly, blues poems, but it was in all of his work, I think, because it was one of his driving aesthetics.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you for sharing that with us. Paula, should we do Kieran's 1798?
Yes, Kieran Carson. I was inclined to bring my recently dead friends with me to this island. I think it's a sign that I don't really want to let them go yet, And Kieran's death this time last autumn, it was a huge loss, Kieran Carson, to us all who are involved in writing in any way on the island. But for all kinds of reasons, I love this poem. It's from a collection, The 12th of Never, which he dedicated to myself and Theo. We were good pals with himself and his wife, Deirdre Shannon, the fiddler. And we'd many nights of music and crack and journeys and visits. In fact, we spent time in New York rambling. We spent time in the cities of Europe rambling, and always fantastic rigmaroles and raw maches and just great times. And the 1798 comes out of the long sequence, The 12th of Never. And a lot of it looks at that kind of pre-romantic period, with the European wars and the song tradition of those wars, translated into sonnets, which is our own song tradition, if you like, the literary song tradition going back to folk song. And I'm really interested in that if you dig far enough back in any so-called high literary form, you will come to the songs of the folk. You'll come to work songs and songs of, like, the sonnet itself goes back to a Sicilian agricultural folk song, lots of cows getting done by bulls and chickens getting done by cocks, and one of these little songs, sonetto as it was known, a little song. So I love that, the foul rag and bone shop of the heart is where these high literary forms derive. And I think the further you go back into them and the further you get closer to their original sources, the more powerful sometimes they could be. So really that collection was a song collection, and you can hear it in this 1798, another of those great huge failures writ large that we were always being told was our history, our preponderance of failed rebellions. So this was the French coming to help us rise against the Saxon foe. And 1798 was another in that chain of disastrous attempts at nationhood. So 1798, I met her in the garden where the poppies grow, quite over canopied with luscious woodbine, and her cheeks were like roses or blood dropped on snow. Her pallid lips were red with papal Spanish wine. Lulled in these wild flowers with dance and delight, I took my opportunity and grasped her hand. She then disclosed the eyelids of her second sight and prophesied that I'd forsake my native land. Before I could protest, she put her mouth to mine and sucked the broken English from my Gaelic tongue. She wound me in her briery arms of eglantine. 2 centuries have gone, yet she and I abide like emblems of a rebel song, no longer sung, or snowy blossoms drifting down the mountainside.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, and I love the muse, the figure of the muse, this creature who comes into the Gaelic tradition of Aisling, the dream poem given to the poet. That figure eventually became an emblem, if you like, one of the emblems that Ivan Boland railed against, an emblem of Mother Ireland, that female energy becoming the subject predominantly of many, many poems. But I love that muse. I love that she reaches back into the Gaelic tradition, and she's very close to Heaney's nature muse, you know, in her ringleted, in her snood with her ringlets out of the briery ditches. So for all many reasons, but especially because I really miss Kieran, I chose 1798.
Well, I'm glad you did. Kieran was a colleague and a friend of mine at the Heaney Centre in Belfast, and he is very missed. I think you could do a wonderful collection of Aishlings really from the last 100 years, and this is certainly one of the most interesting. Briery Arms of Eglantine, Eglantine being Sweetbriar, obviously. Obviously, it's a great poem. Kieran could do anything really, but certainly the 12th of Never, those little songs are one of the pinnacles of his achievement. I'm glad you brought it in.
And you know, excuse me, crashing in again, one of the books that was a huge source for this collection, the 12th of Never collection, was Mrs. Greaves' Modern Herbal, which we gave him as a present. Fantastic lore about the plants themselves, the folklore around individual wildflowers, and he was fantastic at mining these books of lore, dictionaries, thesauri, or whatever the plural is. He could mine those books and spin out these marvelous lyrics.
He was an industry unto himself. He was unbelievable. Terrance, what do you think of this? How you find it? So 1798, United Irishmen Rebellion, led by Wolfe Tone, and came to grief like they always do.
Timeless. When Paula said mining dictionary, I thought you were going to say mining diction, you know, because the poem just is so musical, and it could have been written almost any time since 1798. So that's kind of amazing to me, that the language both being very present, but also having this quality of like, when was this thing written? That's a kind of hard feat for it to still feel so alive. I wasn't aware of the poem. I didn't know the poem until it was, given to us. And I'm amazed at sort of how it just sort of kind of crosses all kinds of ages and qualities of diction and takes advantage of that, the language that it's employing.
Wonderful. Okay, so Terrance, your next one is The Mother.
Yeah, we should probably do that collectively because we both obviously chose it, and it's fascinating that we did both choose it.
What about you each read half of it? Should we do that?
Okay, cool.
Full stop there.
The Mother by Gwendolyn Brooks. Abortions will not let you forget. You remember the children you got that you did not get, the small, damp pulps with little or no hair, the singers and workers that never handled the air. You will never neglect or beat them or silence or buy with the sweet. You will never wind up the sucking thumb or scuttle off ghosts that come. You will never leave them controlling your luscious sigh, return for a snack of them with gobbling mother eye. I have heard in the voices of the wind, the voices of my dim, killed children. I have contracted, I have eased my dim dears at breasts they could never suck.
I have said, sweets, if I sinned, if I seized your look and your lives from your unfinished reach, if I stole your births and your names, your straight baby tears and your games, your stilted or lovely loves, your tumults, your marriages, aches and your deaths, if I poisoned the beginnings of your breaths, believe that even in my deliberateness, I was not deliberate. Though why should I whine? Whine that the crime was other than mine, since anyhow you are dead, or rather, or instead, you are never made. But that too, I am afraid, is faulty. Oh, what shall I say? How is the truth to be said? You are born, you had body, you died. It is just that you never giggled or planned or cried. Believe me, I loved you all. Believe me, I knew you, though faintly, and I loved you all.
Thank you. Terrance, why did you choose this poem?
Well, again, you know, I chose poems that just have like dimensional reasonings for me. So, I mean, at the most basic level, this is a poem that made me become a poet, because when I read it as a sophomore in college and began weeping, I just realized that, you know, painting had never made that happen to me. So it was just a very visceral response to the poem that made me decide, oh, this is probably what I should be doing if language can have this kind of impact on me. Later, though, I've taught it just in terms of the technical stuff, like the way it changes these points of view across the poem, the subtlety of the rhyme scheme. So, and that she wrote in like 1955. I mean, even though she published it a little later, she wrote this poem so early, and that she's not announcing her Blackness. It's sort of like everything is in the poem. It speaks to everybody. So I'm not using the word universal, but for me as a Black poet, to see a Black poet feel like, you know, I'm Black, so I don't need to say it, like to not have to announce it and still like feel like that's, it's context if you want it, but not necessarily so much, you know, freed me up too as a poet to feel like, well, you know, I can write about what I want to write about, personal stuff, you know, anything really. It doesn't always have to be sort of framed by this one, tethered to this one dimension of who I am. So much. 45, formally amazing. And before I ever knew any of that, just the impact it had on me emotionally made me decide that I should be a poet.
Paula.
Yeah, well, again, the emotional impact when I first came across it. And in fact, it was in the early 80s. I was a graduate student up in Washington State, Eastern Washington. And my then husband did an independent study, a Dublin writer, an independent study on Gwendolyn Brooks. And so he introduced me to the work when I was reading what he was bringing home. I was on the kitchen table. And I just loved it. Like her street in Bronzeville just gave me an absolute signpost how I could write about my own life coming out of what were, you know, the tenements of Dublin. I mean, there were so many parallels to the communities, and it was so powerful. I mean, it blew me away, as we say. But when I came back to Dublin in 1983, the amendment, the 8th amendment to our constitution, to the Constitution of the Republic, the 8th amendment was tearing the country apart. And this was put in by the theocracy to give equal rights to the fetus as to the mother, which meant until 2018, our generation and the subsequent generations have been struggling with this shadow over our own bodily autonomy. So in fact, this was one of the poems I brought home with me from my studies in America, from my studies in contemporary American idiom. And she, as a poet, Gwendolyn Brooks, you know, she became the mother with this marvelously compassionate poem, which has sustained me right through. I was a founder of the Artists Campaign to repeal that amendment, and we finally repealed it 2 years ago, having lived with it as a shadow over our womanhood since 1983. So the sense of that, the nourishment she gave my spirit, I just, you know, I could not be more, I couldn't express my gratitude enough. And I have this lovely edition. I think it's the one you took your version from, which look has been retired from the New York Public Libraries in 1982, and I snapped it up. Yeah, fantastic. So I love that we both chose that. And Terrance, do you want to speak about your invention of a new literary form? Because that's kind of mind-blowing.
I'll say, you know, this form, the Golden Shovel, is just always trying to be in dialogue with other poems, in particular her. So again, just to kind of keep it in a very like blood zone, because she was there at the beginning, that form is just me always trying to be in conversation with the person who literally like mothered me into poetry. I was going to say something about just like the deep, deep humanity in the poem, because, you know, you couldn't, like, what's the politics of the poem? The politics are like humanity. Like, you don't need to police how I feel about this. I'm telling you how I feel about it. I don't need the state to govern, to say good or bad. I will tell you I feel the loss without it having to be like it's just anybody could read it. Do you see what I'm saying? Like anybody on either side of that argument is impacted by this particular poem, whatever your stance is. Clearly we're still, and you talking about 2018, I think we're going back to wherever y'all were in the 80s over here with like certain kind of Supreme Court justices. So terrifying, and still saying like through all of those scenarios, this is just still a poem that's saying, if you're a human being, you know, you can read this poem and understand all you need to understand without any kind of like doctrines to tell you how you're supposed to understand or feel.
Yeah. Well, she says it herself. She loved it, us, them, all. I mean, it is so compassionate and full of love.
And I don't know where the world was in 1945, but for us to still be here in 2020 and say that not only politically does a poem still have a deep, deep resonance, but just again, across all of those periods. So if you, again, you see I'm looping back to this idea, like, why would I take it to the island? Because I've been reading my whole life and I'm always affected by it. Hearing you read it so beautifully, I still feel the way I felt, you know, a little bit of that feeling I felt the first time I read it. And I'm grateful that a poem could like withstand all of that, the world and even my own resistance to, you know, picking at it, as I said.
That's why I would take it to the island, because I would read it and remember that for one moment in history, the Irish people actually came together in compassion and took that amendment out of our constitution, you know, and it was an act of compassion. And it was grandparents, it was my generation, it was the people with the first, there were even kids who even didn't have the vote, who were doing peer encouragement to register their peers to get out there and vote and get this out of our constitution, so that there would be no longer this shadow over pregnancy in the Republic. So I would take it to remind me that sometimes, you know, sometimes we can come together as communities and change things, even though at the moment, in the aftermath of the elections, you know, you have to put that under a lot of pressure. Yeah.
So I'll just say one really quickly again, like the nerd professor thing in it, which is like, for as immediate and direct it is very smartly put together, the poem. So you could almost give an assignment, like if you wrote 3 stanzas of a poem and change your point of view in it, because that first stanza is to the mother, it will not let you forget. And then after that, she's sort of talking to somebody else about their children. And then at the end, she's turning to the kids and saying, I loved you all. So it's like all of these quickly, very subtly revolving points of view moving into the poem, which again, just speaks to like its dimensionality, I think. It's just like really smartly put together, I think.
Yeah. It's a wonderful poem and full of craft. It has these rhyming couplets all the way through, obviously, apart from on the word children, which isn't rhymed at all, except for that little killed before chilled, picks up again in that little sound, something very clever there. And a poem that reminds me of Auden's definition of poetry is the clear expression of mixed feelings. This is a poem of mixed feelings. You know, it's deeply ambiguous all the way through. No regret for what happened, but also trying to give, you know, the fullness of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to do Black Mare?
Linda Hall, you know, Hall sounds like an Irish name to me. You know it ain't. It's English. But I so want her to be Irish because she just got such style, such music. And yeah, poet out of New Jersey, Linda Hall. Black Mare. It snakes behind me, this invisible chain gang, the aliases, your many faces, peopling that vast hotel, the past. What did we learn? Every 20 minutes, the elevated train, the world shuddering beyond the pain. It was never warm enough in winter. The walls peeled, the color of corsages ruined in the air. Sweeping the floor, my black wig on the chair, I never meant to leave you in that hotel where the voices of patrons long gone seemed to echo in the halls, a scent of spoiled orchids. But this was never an elegant hotel. The iron fretwork of the L held each room in a deep, corrosive bloom. This was the bankrupt's last chance, the place the gambler waits to learn his black mare's leg snapped as she hurtled toward the finish line. How did we live? Your face over my shoulder was the shade of mahogany in the speckled mirror bolted to the wall. It was never warm. You arrived through a forest of needles, the white mist of morphine, names for sleep that never came. My black wig unfurled across the battered chair. Your arms circled me when I stood by the window. Downstairs, the clerk who read our palms broke the seal on another deck of cards, said, "You're my fate, my sweet, annihilating angel, every naked hotel room I've ever checked out of." There's nothing left of that, but even now, when night pulls up like a limousine, sea blue, and I'm climbing the stairs, keys in hand, I'll reach the landing and you're there. The one lesson I never get right. Trains hurtled by, extinguished somewhere past the bend of midnight. The shuddering world, your arms around my waist. I never meant to leave. Of all that, there's nothing left but a grid of shadows the L tracks throws over the street, the empty lot, gone the blistered sills, voices that reeled across each wall, gone the naked bulbs swinging from the ceiling, that chicanery of light that made your face a brief eclipse over mine. How did we live? The mare broke down. I was your fate, that yellow train, that plot of sleep through dust, crusted on the pane. It was never warm enough. What did we learn? All I have left of you is this burnt place on my arm, so I won't forget you, even when I'm nothing but small change in the desk clerk's palm, nothing but the pawn ticket crumpled in your pocket, the one you'll never redeem. Whatever I meant to say loses itself in the bend of winter towards extinctions, this passion of shadows falling like black orchids through the air. I never meant to leave you there by the pain, that terminal hotel, the world shuddering with trains.
Wonderful. It's like a rejoinder. It's like the female version of Feeling Fucked Up. It's like the answer poem.
Also, just so, I mean, again, poems that you just read and read, you read so much, you start hallucinating things inside of them. So all the L's, I always want to stop when she first does that iron fretwork of the L held each room in a deep corrosive bloom, because all through the poem, she's doing L sounds and she's making L's. The halls, the walls, the real, all the way through it, she's doing this doubling up, hence it being couplets and then like breaking off of the couplet and becoming a one line after all of those stanzas. So inside of the poem, I almost feel like, did she come up with some kind of formal principle for herself? We don't quite see it, but it's there like in the basement of the poem. anyway, so like all of those kind of random things, but the immediacy of it, yeah, does go back to that sentiment of romance, really. Maybe if we're talking about all these poems, that sense of like deep longing and romance that really drives so much poetry is one of the things that I feel in terms of, you know, the blood of the thing.
It's just beautiful. When night pulls up like a limousine, sea blue, just wonderful. Those L sounds are unbelievable. Speckled needles unfurled all the way through. Paula, what do you think of this?
Yeah, well, the L sounds may well be a kind of a lulling because the material is so ferocious and it would rip you apart. And I mean, the formal achievement for me of the poem is the kind of cold hands that deliberately and vividly pick every single detail and marshal it in these lovely, lovely little two-liners marching, and they're so vivid, the details. I mean, you could teach that as a model for how to remember to put flesh and blood again on a situation. And I can't imagine that it was an easy poem to write because there, you know, this great big heart of loss there at the center of it. So it's a marvelous achievement. And, you know, it's like to go back to the amber, the idea of amber, something preserved, you know, the preservation that's at work here is so marvelous. It's a beautiful achievement. I love the title of the book it's from, you know, from Star Ledger. That's lovely because there is the fated thing, you know, when you meet someone and you know your fate is so bound up, there's no escaping it. So this is the lovely paradox of leaving, abandoning, but you know that the fate, they're bound forever now in this poem.
The ebb and flow of it, that it comes back as a refrain. Certain questions keep coming back across the poem. Star Ledger is also the name of the New Jersey newspaper. So she's from New Jersey. So I think she's doing all of those kinds of shadows when she titles it something like that, the book. As with Black Mare, same kind of idea. There's all these kind of implications across it with the title like that.
I don't know her work at all. Linda Hull, is she still alive? Or
she died in '94. The person who told me about her was Yusuf. She, grew up in New Jersey. Actually, you know what? I think I read a piece I wrote about Linda Hull in the video that will come up. So I have like a thing I wrote about her because I've been thinking about her. But she studied with Yusuf. She just happened to be in Indiana because she married David Wojan. It was her second husband after she sort of got clean and sort of decided she was going to be a poet. She had lived for about 10 years, you know, in Chinatown, married to a gambler and addicted to drugs. So she got clean. She wound up in Indiana, got in the MFA program. She'd already written a book, 1986, but the second book, Star Ledger, is, you know, maybe simultaneous with when she was in Indiana. And then, you know, she died in '94. Another book came out. So she only published 3 books in her life. Hart Crane lover, really was into Hart Crane a bit.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that one, introducing us to Linda Hull. Paula, Whitestone Promises.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is by Theo Dorgan, who is my partner, and we've been together for 30 years. So it was the first poem he wrote for me. He's written many poems since, and of course I would take this with me to the island because it's a love poem, and it's a poem that promises, makes a big promise. Miraculously, we're still together, you know, and so I would grab this, especially if I was rushing out and fleeing to this island. This would be something I would grab. And he also mentions, he says, I bring you your mother, Akhmatova. So she was a very important poet to me, the Russian poet, Anna Akhmatova, who, you know, suffered the terror, the Stalinist terror in the 30s, who suffered through that, and, you know, her son was kept in prison to prevent her writing, to prevent her publishing. And in fact, we only really got, I think it was about 1988 that we actually got a substantial collected poems, and a small thaw under Khrushchev in the 60s. some of her work started to be published again. But she was of that generation who, you know, really seemed to get up the nose of Stalin, you know, lyrical poets. You know, they weren't necessarily saying pull down the government, pull down the state. They were writing their poems and bearing their witness, and yet that seems to be the thing that fascists fear most, you know, the private individual witness. And that interests me, you know, that interests me, how the individual witness of private life can be so challenging to fascism. And maybe it's why poetry hasn't died off in the evolutionary onrush, which seems to only let survive what's necessary. And look, we're here, poets in abundance. So we must have some necessary function in this crazy world. So Whitestone promises, Theo Dorgan, if on a dark night after searching until my mind is nearly gone from me, I bring you your mother Akhmatova with her pale hands turned young again to soothe the unquiet from your face, what will you do for me? I ask 3 things only, a night and a day in the dark of your eyes without sleep, the stone that Fervla had from Karul with the white of your breast in it, never to leave my dreaming without saying where you may be found. Crossing the Shannon in broad sunlight, I ask these things of you. You shall have what you need while there is breath in me.
Lovely. Thank you. This is a beautiful poem. I was thinking of that, the magic 3 that you find so often in Irish poetry. I can't remember the word for it now in Irish.
Triadic, isn't it? The triad.
Yeah. Which comes up again and again.
And in Welsh poetry, it's very central, even to contemporary practice. Gillian Clark, I know, uses triads all the time. It's a very satisfactory way, isn't it, of drawing things together.
Yep.
It's that and the other.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I was thinking when you were talking about Akhmatova earlier, I was thinking about that story, which might be apocryphal, but when she was in the queue, I think outside a prison, and a woman turns to her. You know the story.
Yeah, she wrote. I mean, that it's not. It's true in that she wrote it in her poem as her truth, queuing to try and get information at the Christie Day prison. In the queue, trying to bring clothes and food to her son, and not even being sure because they wouldn't even say whether he was in there or not. And a woman in the queue behind her turns and says, "Are you Akhmatova, the poet?" And she says, "I am." And the woman says, "Can you write this?" As in, are you able to write this? And it was the moment where she stepped up and she said, "I can write this, I am." And in that long poem, Requiem, you know, it is a great gesture, like Mandelstam as well. You know, his lovely poem, "What shall I do with this body that's been given to me? So much at one with me, so much my own, for the calm happiness of breathing. Tell me where I should be grateful. I am garden and gardener too, and not alone in this vast dungeon. My breath, my mark, you can already see on the window pane of eternity." So that gesture, you know, to make your mark in your own breath, I think for poets that can feel such an inconsequential gesture in your life. You know, what am I doing? I'm making my mark in my breath. How can that be held against the torrents of oppression in the world? And yet, you know, those poems have survived. They've survived in memory. They've shown us what it was like to survive those times. So I love her poem Requiem. I first came across it in Robert Lowell's translation, or his imitation, or his version of it. So a lot of what I got in poetry came through the United States, you know. as many Irish poets, Kieran with Robert Frost, Ivan with her name has just flown out my ear, with Adrienne Rich, Heaney, of course, with Frost again, farm boys both,
Yeah, this is wonderful. I think what I admire about Theo's poem here is the kind of seriousness of the enterprise. This speech act, this vow to the person, quite rare to be sort of non-ironized or not, like it's straight. It's direct in that way. It's a direct speech act, and in that way seems to take on some of the power of kind of ancient Irish poetry in a way. It's saying the thing as a severe, a serious promise. It's wonderful.
That ending is shocking, but not sentimental. It's a surprising ending because I didn't know the poet. So, I just like hotlines and poems. So without knowing the poet and reading it, I was like, I bring you your mother, Akhmatova, with her pale hands turned young again. That's super hot. Like that's just so radiant, such a notion inside of the poem. Even whether it's true or not, it's beautiful because it's rooted in a very specific kind of statement. But even in its directness, it just has such resonance. The other thing that I was like, it's like a deep image poet. This is what I was working out. Bly, Wright, Lorca, the stone with the white of your breast in it. Like that image is totally like the Duende image for me. So whoever the poet is, it's a hell of a poet. You tell your partner, I'm impressed. But to go to what Nick is saying, there is something about you shall have what you need in me while there is breath in me. None of my students would ever be brave enough to put that in a poem.
Yeah, and I think, Nick, you put your finger on something like, we have, well, I certainly grew to my practice in a time in contemporary poetry where, real distrust of just direct utterance, especially around love poetry or around the expression of affection. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't ironized, it wasn't good. This is what I would hear in workshops all the time. So I find this very refreshing, that someone would stand up and say this and take the flak for it, because, it's not the irony thing. It can be a terrible cul-de-sac.
Well, I hope
it ain't simple though. I mean, it's not. It's like a little need and me in it. It's just even a statement of it. I just find it a very direct statement, not a sentimental statement. So I wouldn't even defend it on one's right to be sentimental, which I can defend if I need to. I defend it on it's so surprising and so like true when you come to it at the end of the poem like that. And again, even that little soft little music and the E sounds at the end of it, just like make it such a great little close on the poem.
Okay.
Maybe one day, Terrance, someone will write a poem like that for us.
We can hope. We can hope.
We can hope. Thank you for sharing that one. Okay, so should we do Anodyne, Yusuf's a colleague of ours at NYU, and then I think that'll be 5 each, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That'll be 5 each.
Okay,
and again, if I'm just doing, couplings here, it just still, Paula talking makes me think about like the poems we receive from the people that are close to us. I feel this about a lot of your poems, Nick. It's like sometimes you almost don't want to know what the people you care about are able to do in terms of their talent. And other times it's just like a whole other kind of experience. So again, you just almost have to I'm engaging the poet Nick, the persona Nick, who makes this beautiful thing. So that's how I feel about Yusuf, someone who's, been through most of my writing life, certainly one of my earliest teachers, and I still think of as a teacher. And I think of this as being one of those poems early on, which is, it's like 98, 99. He was with Wesley and he hadn't even gotten to FSG with the Walcott, the kind of big name poets. People knew who he was. He had won the Pulitzer about 4 years earlier. But even through that, this poem isn't in Neon Vernacular, which won the Pulitzer. So I had read that book and was like, oh, cool. But this was just something else. It's so ballsy. And I mean, as I say that, I'm like, there's all kinds of ways you would hear something like that. It was just like the central premise of the poem I found to be so daring. I think the nature of praise is so daring inside of the poem. All right, so we can talk more about that, if you don't see what I'm talking about here. Anodyne, Yusuf Komunyakaa. I love how it swells into a temple where it is held prisoner, where the god of blame resides. I love slopes and peaks, the secret paths that make me selfish. I love my crooked feet, shaped by vanity and work shoes made to outlast belief. The hardness, coupling milk it can't fashion. I love the lips, salt and honeycomb on the tongue, the hair holding off rain and snow, the white moons on my fingernails. I love how everything begs blood into song and prayer inside an egg. A ghost hums through my bones like Pan's midnight flute, shaping internal laws beside a troubled river. I love this body, made to weather the storm in the brain, raised out of the deep smell of fish and water hyacinth, out of rapture and the first regret. I love my big hands. I love it clear down to the soft, quick motor of each breath, the liver's 10 kinds of desire, and the kidney's lust for sugar. This skin, this sack of dung and joy, the spleen floating like a compass needle inside nighttime, always divining West Africa's dusty horizon. I love the birthmark, posed like a fighting cock on my right shoulder blade. I love this body, this solo and ragtime jubilee behind the left nipple, because I know I was born to wear out at least 100 angels.
Wonderful. So, what do we think the title is doing here?
You know, anodyne, cure-all, pleasure principle. It always just keeps revolving. You have to tell me, you know, that's so many good conversations about the relationship between this title and the poem itself. But, you know, I'll just be very for it. Like the it in it, like I love how it swells into a temple and then like held prisoner inside of another kind of body. Like it just begins with such a like forward phallic image. And then it just opens up and does all these other kinds of things. But to me, I just like, I'm trying to think of another poem, and certainly that I've ever read, that starts out by, you know, I love how it swells. I mean, that's so blatant. And yet the poem is doing so many, I mean, obviously to make it a pronoun is super smart, but the poem is like, I love this whole body, all of it. And to me, that's just so radical. And again, another kind of thing, like it's radical to be coming from a Black man. It's radical to be coming from Yusuf, as I understand his presence in the world. It's radical to be coming from anyone that's really, you know, it's the kind of assignment you want to give anybody, to say, look at yourself and don't say everything about it. There's no shame hides on your body. So it's that kind of energy comes from the poem.
Something like a light bulb goes off when he says, I love my big hands.
Yeah, right.
It seems like the human inside talking to the human inside.
Yeah, both. You know, he loves those big, like Pan's midnight flute, but yeah, to have like the dirt and the dung and the hands inside of it. That's like, you know, that's some Seamus Haney type thing too, like trying to wed the universe of the earth with the celestial space above it, you know, between those two is man, is how I think about some of what's happening here.
But also the way that the praise poem turns to a kind of brag poem in the end, where I was born to wear out at least 100 angels, is terrific.
That's right.
How are you feeling, Paula?
Well, the end of it really spoke to me, because my grandmother used to say to me that I don't have guardian angel, I have a whole horde of them, because of the rickety kind of life I've led when I was young. So that really speaks to me. And it's just to me the daily miracle that my body has survived all that craziness of youth and onwards, and that I'm here and that I'm relatively sane in a sometimes insane world. That idea of a horde of angels, I just love it, and I feel that featheriness throughout the poem. You know, to look coldly and lovingly at yourself is a great act, and he's given us that act. You know, he's given us that ability to look at ourselves coldly and lovingly, and forgive, maybe, that have no shame. We're here, we've survived, we're doing our best. So there's a lot to commend it to me, and I like the way it moves down the page and doesn't, you know, where the the breath is put under quite a bit of pressure, isn't it, to say it? So by the end, you're slightly edgy because the lines haven't broken where you think they might break. So your breath work kind of brings you up into a nervy state. So by the end, you feel more alive, and you've all your angels fluttering around you. Yeah, it's quite a hit.
I want to riff off of that, because I wonder if you think about this even with like T.O.'s poem. Again, to be lucky enough to have a poem, have people in your life that are writing poems. So, this is a record, because this isn't his body. I know the body that he was in when he wrote this poem. And, these many years later, it's a different sort of body. So the poem just becomes a record against age, against time, in the way that I think about, like, lovers, like, we're having a fight, why don't you go pull that poem out so you can remember where we are, as opposed to like where we seem to be, so I think that the poem is a record of like his true spirit, whatever the ravages of time might do to love or to the body.
Have you done that, Paula, with Whitestone Promises? Brought it to Theo and said,
Well, yeah, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of love poems. I feel so lucky, to have them. I can weaponize poem as well as the next person.
Yeah, I mean, you should have what you need while there's breath in me. You can use that for everything: new cars, shoes, houses, books, vacations. But have what you need as long as there's breath in me. So.
It's an argument clincher. It's been just wonderful talking to you both, and just wonderful poems you brought along to talk about, and we are enlightened and honoured. So thank you both very much. And now we get to hear you read your own stuff, which is just wonderful. So terrific. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm about to go. Thank you again for joining us in celebration for the 12th annual Irish Arts Centre Poetry Fest. We are now at the final reading, where we get to spend some time more with Terrance and Paula Meehan and their work. Thank you again to all at Irish Arts Centre for their work on the festival, and to Tom Rowley and Max Smith for their work on the videos. And of course, to all the participating poets, Terrance and Paula, Ada Limón, Miriam Gamble, and Ailbhe Darcy, and also to Nick Laird, festival curator. It's been a good day. Enjoy, and we'll see you next year.
So Terrance Hayes was born in 1971 in Columbia, South Carolina. He received a BA from Coker College and an MFA from the University of Pittsburgh. He was professor of creative writing at Carnegie Mellon University until 2013 when he joined University of Pittsburgh. He now teaches at NYU. Terrance has published 7 collections of verse, including Hip Logic, Muscular Music, Wind in a Box, Lighthead, How to Be Drawn, and most recently, American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. He's been awarded the National Book Award, a MacArthur Grant, and is a Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. He also wrote a fascinating critical engagement to float in the space between, a life and work in conversation with the life and work of Etheridge Knight. Terrance is a word magician, a wizard of form with the kind of tough and tender poetic voice you'd want to hear talking about almost anything, anywhere. He's justly celebrated as one of the most important and daring poetic voices in American literature. He invents forms. The Golden Shovel is one from his book Lighthead, and his work is constantly expanding the definitions of lyric poems. From the pecha kucha, it's a Japanese term for chit-chat where you get to explain a topic in a certain amount of time, to writing poems as interviews, as crime reports, as instructions for a seance and so on. And he's a marvellous systematizer, given to grids and puzzles, for example sketching the habits of 5 anthropological tribes and how to be drawn. His last book, American Sonnets, is one of the strongest collections to appear in years on either side of the Atlantic. Terrance happens to be a neighbour and a friend of mine, and I knew he'd been writing these sonnets really at a breakneck pace, sometimes one a day. And when he gave them to me, I had to put them in a cupboard after reading the book. It was just rocket fuel, it was radioactive. So much rage and joy in those poems, so much power and craft and voice, all in the one place. Terrance is also a wonderful artist and creates videos for his poems. They're really worth checking out on Vimeo, and I think he'll be doing some cross-genre stuff today for us. One can see the predecessors occasionally in Terrance's work. Our colleague at NYU, Yusuf Komunyakaa, the great and recently deceased poet David Berman, there's Wanda Coleman in there, there's Larry Levis, but no one has written like Terrance Hayes. He's a one-off and he's a marvel. So we're lucky to have Paula and Terrance here today with me to discuss the poems they take with them to a desert island and to read.
American Sonnet for the Magic Apples. Or the one drunken half-quarter grand uncle, recalling the sound speckled apples on his fabled real daddy's coastal orchard made, falling multi-dimensionally to the vaguely salty combination of plantation dirt and marshland, bearing the roots of this strange distant cousin to the West Indian pear, West African plum, and low country palm, sweet as a bloody, dusky ruby, husky and almost as bulky as the lamenting lamb's head his daddy lopped off once and kicked at him, laughing, the uncle informed me, wistfully, at a reunion of family fleecers, fabricators, fairy tellers, and makeup artists, with his cast-off, awful alcohol stench burning my nostrils when he gripped the nape of my neck and gazed deeply at the speckled invisible apple small as a head in his hand. Linda Hull, 1954-1994, Newark, New Jersey. Linda Hull, like Walt Whitman, not to mention Dorothy Parker, William Carlos Williams, Allen Ginsberg, W.S. Merwin, Anne Waldman, Patti Smith, Amiri Baraka, was born on the mystifying planet of New Jersey. Hull's poems are as incendiary as the lighter fluid inside the sturdy stainless steel Zippo lighter she stole from her father, a spout of Spitfire, when she ran away from home at 16. I remember this the way I'd remember a knife against my throat that night. After the overdose, you told me to count to calm myself, Hull writes, and counting in Chinese. A poem derived, one assumes, from Hull's years high as the moon on the lam in Chinatown, married to a gambler from Shanghai. Taking up her pen and mostly laying down her syringe, Hen was divorced and remarried to a poet by 1984, living on fugitive wonder and figurative language, lines of Hopkins and Akhmatova in Arkansas and later Indiana. Hull sometimes read her poems wearing dangling earrings and ankle-strapped high heels with her flapper's hairdo dyed the same color as her beret. In addition to lighter fluid, Hull's poems display the properties of rain just before it evaporates. Hull's poems hold salt water, Tide of Voices and Ghost Money, 1986, Shore Leave and Star Ledger, 1991, Rivers into the Sea, In the Only World, 1995, published a year after her death in a car crash in Provincetown, a few miles from the beach. When she wakes on the other side, Hull spends the hours she's not writing poetry, mulling figurative wonder with holy wine while listening to fugitive jazz. Sometimes Bird appears with his horn on the cover of Ornithology. Having retained her uncanny ability to channel varieties of sound, Hull scats to Bird like Ella Fitzgerald wiping sweat from her brow. Sometimes ghosts come by. When she was alive, Hull memorized the entirety of The Bridge, a 56-page multi-section poem about the Brooklyn Bridge written by Hart Crane, Hull's favorite poet, in 1923 when he was 23 and working as a copywriter in Cleveland 9 years before his suicide. Hart Crane comes by sometimes. Hull regales him with passages of The Bridge, long until the eternal evening. The African Rainbow Lizard. In Pompano, Black people are descendants of the African rainbow lizard. Native to Africa, the eggs of the lizard were stored in the hair of kidnapped Africans. I have no information regarding why it carries a rainbow, having seen the losses it saw on slave ships and coast. At cookouts, a single African rainbow lizard is guaranteed to appear on the picnic table among the hot dogs, ribs, store-bought coleslaw, and canned sodas. Some African rainbow lizards possess a heightened taste in music, cinema, and art. Others have a gift for reading people. The African rainbow lizard can survive on a diet of fire ants and fireflies, pill bugs and ladybugs, houseflies, houseplants, and Mother's Day flowers. Some Black working middle-class parents work too much to attend the games and performances of their Black working middle-class children. At night, the parents are exhausted and temperamental. Pepper and salt shakes from them like sweat. They worked themselves to death, naturally. In Pompano Beach, I saw folk Black as beetles, and I saw a Black child place a beetle in his mouth. I saw roaches large as matchboxes. I saw Black folk cuss and joke with smoke in the mouth. Agama, I heard them whisper. Agama, the African rainbow lizard. Outside of Pompano, about a mile from the sea, where the annual African Rainbow Lizard Convention convenes, an actual African rainbow lizard has never been seen. A number of elderly Black folk and their grandchildren attend. No one is allowed to mention the African rainbow lizard when the annual African Rainbow Lizard Convention convenes. Instead, the elderly Black folk tell fish fables. The largest and most powerful African rainbow lizard are often cannibalistic, devouring their young, according to page 174 of V.A. Harris's 1964 The Life of the Rainbow Lizard. The African rainbow lizard often runs a small business. The mother runs a hair salon out of the house. The father runs a fish market. When he drives Black Pompano in his beat-up pickup, coming and going, someone shouts his name. Fish guts slush in the buckets, fish guts gust in the air with disgust. But men cheer him on when he drives the Black streets. Women wear hair elaborately weaved, pressed, and styled by the mother. African rainbow lizards do not have white people for bosses. To witness the sad and beautiful changes in a family is just about reason enough to live. I was not an African rainbow lizard. Their cousin wasn't my father. None of their blood was in me.
Each summer I lived fearing this would be revealed. If a lizard can talk, it is guaranteed to sing beautifully. I saw someone stumbling in the doorway. No, two men hugging, tussling, breathing. The mother was screaming, Agama, Agama. The father's tongue was like the forked, vicious tongue of the African rainbow lizard. He seemed to be trying to bite into the neck of his son, kiss him, lick him. I might have slept through the scene, overhearing a dream, not the mother screaming as she bites her lip and wields a knife at the son, or perhaps the father, not the mother, but several of the daughters screaming, Mama, Mama, but it sounded like Agama. Or they are joking how the father died clenching a nickel, a bundle of $200 or $320 bills in his church sock drawer, another bundle of teens and 20s, another bundle of 10s or 20s probably under his deathbed or pillow, a couple pounds of mason jars filled with coins in his closet, the little quarter-ounce nugget of silver he found when digging the grave of his father tucked safely in his mouth, all of it stinking like the guts of fish. The clothes washed twice a day, twice a week, and stinking still. The socks balled tight in his drawer beside the money, and the pistol stunk of fish. The scales of several varieties of fish were under his bed and nails. Tiny, greasy, granular scales glimmered in his hair. His pillow stunk of fish. The mother worked herself to death. The father died with his fist balled so tightly no one could say whether it was money or scales he clenched. American Sonnet for my past and future assassin. The only single women widows now, or brides half married to the breeze. We lie to stay together, we lie to make do. We lie to break the truth apart. We lie to shake fruit from the trees. My mother favored the worker bee. Her love buzzed with stickiness and sting. I'm here about the widow afraid of butterflies. A widow knows ruin may be as comprehensive as rain, a kind of cover for the dirt about the dead. Nature does not destroy, only change. Get down on your knees and pray and get up quickly and live to celebrate that. Falling is the first and most important skill in many things. How to fall without breaking, as well as how to break. Tell me what you pray when you are broken or break. Lorenzo Thomas, 1949-2005. Broken Absidarian Lorenzo Cento. A hurricane is swirling in the Gulf, all Americans are losing. All silence says music will follow because it is conceived as a tonal evocation. Bloodless hands glowing. Can you read my gestures? Come on with the foliage. Eating your petals in the afternoon, I wanted to be so fancy. Given choices standing in the street, grateful. Here is no redly opulent Cossack. No painted trinity. History is still ephemera. I'm trying to make my songs. I'd rather take flying lessons. If any man were willing to change places, I gather light. I know where I belong. It's not that I've grown blind. It was when neon was no longer available. I was born a speck of sand. John Donne would think of an island, knowing I will not sleep tonight. Life's not light with a veil of dust. Love fills its absences with doubt. Morning, morning, Sunday. Night just keeps on arriving. Oh, excellent night. One person amplified. 100 only fit now. Part of it thought up in the silence. Say justice speaks so she contends with clouds of fortune. Since you are my lover, I sit erect in an ordinary chair. Sometimes I'm saying I love you. That will not make these lyrics more beautiful. The Idle Boys are waiting in the park. The land was there before us. There are no gospel singers. There is a place beyond the reach. The song light sparkles. The vipers advance this useless clairvoyance to a lotus. Tonight, I count my sins. We are traveling to and forth on the sound. What shines is your black body when you are alive. You cannot sleep. You have this world and others. It's based on first lines from the collected poems of Lorenzo Thomas. Disconsensuses. Pie chart of people who believe in a police state of emergency exit to the rear of the building versus people who believe in a country of law and order is always airing somewhere in the country. Or color wheel of people who believe it's a right to dislike whoever you dislike versus people who believe thinking is more important than feeling. Or a kaleidoscope of people who believe the movie villain is not always, but usually Val Kilmer, versus people who believe Bob Dylan would only be considered a poet if he'd read the words of his songs without complement of music. Or genealogical tree rings of the people before us versus the people behind us versus the people who come after us versus the people who believe a villain is one who is likely to only trouble your notion of utopia, but an enemy is one who is likely to destroy it. Or broken record vinyl of people used to choosing the wrong answers versus people busy asking the wrong questions versus people who believe any law requires at least two people to be effective. Or doodle swirl of people who believe in a state of grace under fire extinguisher versus people who believe in a state of grace under fire from the hip versus people who believe in a state of grace under fire in the back of the mind, fire in the belly of the beast. Or bullseye of people who believe life is a glorious vacation from death since one spends more time dead than alive versus people who believe a brother should not run from a policeman with a gun because if he's going to shoot anyway, make him look you in the face.
Paula Meehan was born in Dublin and educated there at Trinity College and at Eastern Washington University. She's published 7 collections of poetry, including most recently Geomantic, a dreamy psychodrama made up of 81 poems of 9 lines comprising 9 syllables each. She was Ireland Chair of Poetry from 2013 to 2016, and her fascinating public lectures from her tenure were published as Imaginary Bonnets with Real Bees in Them, which includes certainly the greatest lecture on bears in poetry you're ever going to hear. Last month, Meehan published a terrific Selected Poems as if by magic, and it's an impressive summation of her achievement, showcasing the development and continuation of her vital work as a witness and a testifier. In these marvellous poems, the natural world appears and reappears as both consolation and warning, and the work traffics in the politics of gender and class, and as always Meehan's hometown of Dublin recurs as a backdrop. Meehan is a keeper of the mysteries, of the old ways, and her engagement with myth in all forms, from the Native American to the ancient Irish to the Greek, has informed and changed contemporary Irish poetry. Finally, though, she's a poet of compassion, of pity and wonder. Meehan's work is shot through with gratitude, with astonishment at the world and thanks for our place in it. One of her poems, The Statue of the Virgin at Granard Speaks, was shortlisted for a poem for Ireland a few years ago, and as well as being a brilliant summation of rural Ireland, with its various weathers, and its tough smoke from outlying farms, its girls in communion frocks like pale rivals to the riot in the hedgerows of cow parsley and haw blossom. The poem is also, in its imaginative daring, in its deep historical knowledge of our shaping forces, and its refocusing of the lens of an event, a brilliant and crystallising example of Meehan's own work. In January 1984, a 15-year-old called Anne Lovett died giving birth in secret to her baby son at the hillside grotto on the outskirts of her hometown of Granada in Longford. The hillside grotto is a statue of the Virgin Mary. So both mother and child died that day, and speaking of Anne Lovett, in the voice of the statue of the Virgin Mary, the poem ends, "And though she cried out to me in extremis, I did not move. I didn't lift a finger to help her. I didn't intercede with heaven, nor whisper the charmed word in God's ear. On a night like this, I number the days to the solstice and the turn back to the light. O sun, centre of our foolish dance, burning heart of stone, molten mother of us all, hear me and have pity." As Meehan writes, it can be bitter here at times, it can be lovely here at times. There are, as they say, only two prayers, please and thank you. The invocation and the elegy, the request and the appreciation, and Meehan's poetry does them both wonderfully. I'm delighted she could return to read with us today at PoetryFest.
So great to be here virtually in New York, a city I love and miss. I hope you're all doing well over there this early November. I want to thank Nick Laird for the opportunity to get out of my gardening clothes and put on a dress. And I want to thank Rachel Gilkey there in the Irish Arts Centre for facilitating all the organising that goes into getting this show on the road. And I'm absolutely delighted to be reading with Mr. Terrance Hayes. He gave me one of the great experiences of my life when he asked me to contribute to an anthology dedicated to Gwendolyn Brooks, celebrating 100 years since her birth, and more of that anon. So I'm going to start with a poem that in a roundabout way has a connection to New York. I wrote it when I lived in a very remote spot in County Leitrim during the last Great Recession in the 1980s. And there in the byre of the small farmhouse I lived in, I found a 78 record whole in a nest of smashed records. And it was Two-Buck Tim from Timbuktu by the Bellboys of Broadway. It had been published, the sheet music had been published in 1933. And it brought into the farmhouse that whole feeling of emigration. There'd been 13 kids raised in that cottage and they'd all emigrated. But obviously they were sending home the music. So, Two-Buck Tim from Timbuktu. I found it in the granary under rubble where the back gable caved in. A 78 miraculously whole in a nest of smashed records, as if it had been hatched by a surreal hen, a pullet with a taste for the exotic. I took it in and swabbed it down, put it on the turntable and filled the cottage with its scratchy din. Ghosts of the long dead flocked from their narrow grooves beneath foreign soil to foxtrot round my kitchen in the dusk. I'd say Leitrim in the 40s was every bit as depressed as Leitrim was that day. The young were heading off in droves. The same rain fell all winter long. Eventually, one old woman was left looking at her hands while the bellboys of Broadway played Two-Buck Tim from Timbuktu and dreamt her daughters back about the place. The swing of a skirt, a face caught in lamplight with every revolution of the disc. This winter I have grown unduly broody. As I go about my daily work, another worldly mantra turns within my head. Two-Buck Tim from Timbuktu, Two-Buck Tim from Timbuktu. It keeps me up at night. I roam about the rooms. I hope to catch them at it. I want to rend the veil, step out onto their plane, spiral down a rain-washed road, let some ghostly partner take the lead, become at last another migrant soul. So this book is just hot off the press. It's a selected poem, probably from, well, definitely from the last 30 years of publication, and it's called As If by Magic, because indeed, very much the poems come to me as if by magic, and it's always quite a miracle when I finish a poem and it's there. So to honour that, I'm going to read this poem, which is set again back in the wilds of County Leitrim, our own beautiful lake country, and it involves going to the well to get water in the deep, deep winter. So, well, poetry, of course, for me has been a great source in my own life and in the lives of the communities I've worked with. So, well, I know this path by magic, not by sight. Behind me, on the hillside, the cottage light is like a star that's gone astray. The moon is waning fast, each blade of grass a rune inscribed by hoarfrost. This path's well worn. I lug a bucket by bramble and blossoming blackthorn. I know this path by magic, not by sight. Next morning when I come home quite unkempt, I cannot tell what happened at the well. You spurn my explanation of a sex spell cast by the spirit who guards the source that boils deep in the belly of the earth, even when I show you what lies strewn in my bucket, a golden waning moon, 7 silver stars, our own porch light, your face at the window, staring into the dark. So, another poem coming out of winter, out of November, the time we're in, the time of the souls, all the souls. This is a poem concerning my father, the realization of the moment when I realized he was mortal. My father perceived as a vision of St. Francis. It was the piebald horse in next door's garden, frightened me out of a dream with her dawn whinny. I was back in the box room of the house, my brother's room now, full of ties and sweaters and secrets. Bottles chinked on the doorstep. The first bus pulled up to the stop. The rest of the house slept, except for my father. I heard him rake the ash from the grate, plug in the kettle, hum a snatch of a tune. Then he unlocked the back door and stepped out into the garden. Autumn was nearly done. The first frost whitened the slates of the estate. He was older than I had reckoned, his hair completely silver, and for the first time I saw the stoop of his shoulder, saw that his leg was stiff. What's he at so early, and still stars in the west? They came then, birds of every size, shape, colour. They came from hedges and shrubs, from eaves and garden sheds, from the industrial estate, from outlying fields. From Dubber Cross they came, and the ditches of the North Road. The garden was a pandemonium when my father threw up his hands and tossed the crumbs to the air. The sun cleared O'Reilly's chimney, and he was suddenly radiant, a perfect vision of St. Francis, made whole, made young again in a fingless garden. So, we lost one of our great poets last autumn. This time last year, indeed, Ciarán Carson. And I first met Ciarán when he asked me to go off on tour around the north of Ireland when he was traditional music officer and a literature officer in the Northern Irish Arts Council. And he sent me off with a group of traditional musicians, and I got this poem out of that trip around the road during the time near the time of the first ceasefire. It didn't hold 1994, but it was a step on the road to the current peace process, which, fingers crossed, is holding. So, home. I am the blind woman finding her way home by a map of tune. When the song that is in me is the song I hear from the world, I'll be home. It's not written down and I don't remember the words, but I know when I hear it, I'll have made it myself. I'll be home. A version I heard once in Leitrim was close, a wet Tuesday night in the Shanrelig bar. I'd come for the session, I stayed for the vision and lore. The landlord called time, the music dried up, the grace notes were pitched to the dark. When the jukebox blared out, I'd only 4 senses and he left me senseless, I'd no choice but to take to the road. On Grafton Street in November, I heard a mighty sound. A travelling man with a didgeridoo blew me clear to Botany Bay. The tune too far back to live in, but scribed on my bones. In a past life I must have been kangaroo, rocked in my dream time, convict ships coming o'er the foam. In the puzzle factory one winter, I was sure I was home. The talking in tongues, the riddles, the rhymes struck a chord that cut through the pharmaceutical haze. My rhythm, catatonic, I lulled myself back to the womb. My mother's heart beating, the drum of herself and her world. I was tricked by her undersong, just close enough to my own. I took then to dancing. I spun like a dervish. I swear I heard the subtle music of the spheres. It's no place to live but out there in space on your own, hung aloft the night. The tune was in truth a mechanical drone. I was a pitiful monkey, jigging on cue. I came back to earth with a land, to rain on my face, to sun in my hair, and grateful too. The wise women say you must live in your skin, call it home. No matter how battered or broken, misused by the world, you can heal. This morning a letter arrived on the 9 o'clock post, the Department of Historical Reparation, and who did I blame? The nuns, your mother, the state. Tick box provided, we'll consider your case. I'm burning my soapbox, I'm taking the very next train. A citizen of nowhere, nothing to my name. I'm on my last journey, though my lines are all wonky, they spell me a map that makes sense. Where the song that is in me is the song I hear from the world, I'll set down my burden and sleep. The spot that I lie on at last, the place I'll call home. So folks, it's coming close to my last poem, and I want to just read a poem from my grandmother, again set in November, Hannah, grandmother. Coldest day yet of November, her voice close in my ear. Tell them priests nothing. Was I 12, 13, filthy minded? Keep your sins to yourself. Don't be giving them a thrill. Dirty old feckers. As close as she came to the birds and the bees on her knees in front of the Madonna, Our Lady of the Facts of Life. Beside the confessional, oak doors closing like a coffin lid, neatly carpentered, waxed and buffed. In the well-made box of this poem, her voice dies. She closes her eyes and bows, lowers her brow to her joined hands, prays hard, woman to woman. And finally, I want to read this poem for Terrance Hayes, who asked me for a poem for his anthology, and this is the one I gave him, and it wouldn't have come except for his great offer. And also, it is such a pleasure to read with a great poet and also an inventor of a new literary form, the golden shovel. So, in memory of Gwendolyn Brooks and her great line in her poem, The Mother, the singers and workers who never handle the air, the ghost song. From a dream of summer, of absence, I woke to winter. Carol singers decked the walls of some long-lost homeland. Late-night shoppers and drowsy workers headed for the train. So the night that you died was two-faced. June light never far from mind, though snow fell. I handled grief like molten sunshine, learned to breathe your high, lithe ghost song from thinnest air. Good night. Thank you very much for your attention.